Welcome back to Journey with Andie. This is part 6 and we are picking up with me visiting with Paul one morning after I finished my shift at work, because I work night shift at the hospital. He's awake and looking around but not talking. I also noticed that his breathing is a lot faster than normal. And his O2 sats are fine, but I was still a little concerned because, his breathing was so labored. So, of course, I, let his nurse know that, hey, his breathing is a little labored. It hasn't been like this. I know his O2 sats say, that, they're fine. He's setting fine, but he's, his breathing is still labored. And around that same time, respiratory came in to give him his breathing treatment. I was like, hey, have you noticed that, his breathing is labored? And she's like, yeah, I can see that, I can tell, and that's not usually how he is. So she goes ahead, and give him the breathing treatment, and I continue to visit, after the breathing treatment is finished. So I video call my dad, my aunt, and my uncle. This is something I had been doing the entire time he's been in the hospital anyway. I would video call them so that he could hear, somebody else's voice besides mine. I had made it up in my mind, and I was determined that it was important for him to hear our voice, to let him know that even though, for the most part he was always asleep, that to let him know that, we love him, we're fighting for him. We're fighting with him, even, just for it to filter into his subconscious mind, that he's loved, and for him to continue fighting and not to give up, because we haven't given up on him. So we finished the video chat, and I'm just splitting around his room doing this and that, trying to pick up the slack kind of where the hospital drops the ball. I understand that their main focus is like keeping the person alive, but I feel like once a person is stable, they should start looking at the person as a whole. You never know how much something so simple as shaving a person that's usually shaved can make a difference. So the simplest things can improve the quality of life for a person, and so that's what I did while I was there. I tried my best to improve his quality of life while he was in the hospital. That's where I tried to, pick up the slack there. He hadn't been shaved in about 3 months, the whole time he'd been in the hospital. So I shaved him. His feet were a mess. They were like so caked up with dry skin. It was like he had scales on the bottom of his feet. So of course I talked to the nursing staff about that, for them to start rubbing his feet down with lotion, to try to start softening that up. And then his mouth, his oral care was horrible, like awful. I give props to, it was one particular nurse that she tried, her best to kind of keep his oral care up. And she even had one of the doctors come look at his mouth, because it was like black on the inside, because she thought maybe it was like a fungus or something that was growing. But the doctor told her, no, that's plaque, and all of that can come off. And so it was pretty much just a case of nobody doing his oral care properly. So that was just one more thing I added to my list of things to do when I came to visit with him, checking on his feet and making sure his oral care was done, and if not, doing it myself. So, but this particular day, with his breathing being labored, that was a change, because he hadn't been breathing like that. I was kind of like hounding the nurse until it was time for me to leave and go to school. And the next day I got a call saying that they had called a rapid response for him, because he was declining. He had the criteria for a rapid response at our hospital. It's a few different things that I won't go into, but come to find out, somebody had let the head of his bed down too low and he aspirated. So aspiration is when, aspiration is when something from the stomach, like stomach contents or whatever, backs up into the lungs, and it can cause pneumonia. It's called aspiration pneumonia. But in his case, it was from his tube feeding. When a person is receiving tube feeding, the head of the bed has to stay elevated at least 30 degrees to try to prevent that aspiration, but somebody lowered his head lower than it should, and he aspirated. So that caused him to start having trouble breathing, and he ended up back on the ventilator. So they wanted to speak to his next of kin. Up until this point, I had been managing his medical, but my aunt was listed on his chart as the next of kin. So they wanted to speak to next of kin to see if they wanted to make him a DNR. Now the crazy part is they couldn't reach her because, you know, probably about an hour or so before that, I had spoke to her, my dad, and my uncle. I was telling them about the conversation that I had with the doctor previously when he mentioned about him coming home on hospice. All of this was happening around the same time when I had that conversation with him. I tried to be very candid with them when I got information, when I was relaying it to them, because they had to make decisions based off what I was telling them. So I wanted to make sure I was very upfront with the information that I was giving them. So I told them the full conversation about, you know, what he told me, him being discharged to home, and, you know, about them not being able to do anything else, and that, you know, he should be discharged home with hospice. So we had that conversation, and my aunt was actually headed to a doctor's appointment, but she didn't take it well. So I was like, okay, I know that wasn't a good time to tell her, but, you know, we were under some time constraints, and I had to let them know what was going on because they were looking for some answers from the hospital. So when they called to see about making him a DNR, I said, no, he'll remain a full code, and when I speak to my aunt, I'll get her to call you back, and then she'll tell you the same thing. So at that point, I was already headed to where my aunt was going that morning. She had a doctor's appointment. So because she didn't take the conversation that I had with them earlier well, I just wanted to make sure she was okay. So I was already headed to her doctor's appointment to see her. And then I called my uncle, her husband, to, you know, see if he was near, just, you know, just to be there to support her. So now, don't get me wrong, the doctor was, you know, just doing his job, telling us his prognosis, and he was telling us what, you know, what he sees with his natural eyes. So me and my family, we don't deal in the natural, we deal in the spiritual. So yes, he was doing his job. Yes, we respect what he said, but we were believing and trusting in God for a healing. So it was at this point that they called the family in, the family being my dad, my uncle, my aunt, and myself. And, you know, to have the talk, quote unquote, the talk. But this wasn't even from the doctor. This was from the social worker. She was saying that, you know, if he gets off the ventilator, do y'all want him to come home, and do y'all want him to come home on hospice, because he's not going to get any better. And she was very blunt with it too, like, and it was not a shock to them because I had already had this conversation with them earlier. So the decision was made that once he got off the ventilator and was stable, he would be coming home, but he would be coming home with home health and not hospice. Now let me say, I was glad when he was extubated and moved off this unit, because I didn't care for the nurse that he had. And let me just say this to any healthcare professional that may be listening. When a family makes a decision, step back and respect it. It's not your place to ask them every time they call or every time you speak to them whether or not they want to make someone a DNR after they've made their decision not to. And then it definitely is not your place to say that not making him a DNR is cruel. So I didn't have this conversation. The conversation was with my aunt, but let me just say the Lord knew that conversation was not meant to be had with me because I wasn't ready. I would have failed that test epically, because that is one of the most unprofessional things I have ever heard of someone doing. And You're allowed to have your opinion, but unless you're asked your opinion, keep it to yourself. And it was a moot point anyway because he never coded. The entire time he was in the hospital, he never coded. Yes, he was on and off the ventilator, but coded, he never coded. So it was a moot point anyway. So just, you know, you're allowed to have your opinion, but unless you're asked for it, keep it to yourself. Okay, so end rant. Like I was saying, he was extubated and moved out of the ICU, thankfully, within the next day or two. If you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Click that notification bell so that you don't miss out on the next video. The journey continues with part 7. Paul has another surgery and ends up back on the ventilator. Can't make this stuff up. The truth is stranger than fiction. So journey with me, and thanks for watching.